Min Jianyang, a former Chinese intelligence officer, orchestrated one of the world's most successful car thefts in 1999. With his team, they targeted high-end cars like Audi, BMW, and Mercedes-Benz. Through military precision, Yang amassed millions of dollars from these heists. These daring ventures would ultimately earn him the nickname America's Greatest Car Thief. And it all started in New York. A sudden increase in the vanishing of luxury cars caught New York by surprise. Given the city's wealth and high concentration of high-end cars, the gang of thieves had plenty of options to choose from. As the thefts continued, the thieves became more proficient, carrying out a greater number of car thefts in a shorter time frame. In a single week, a total of 48 high-end vehicles were reported stolen. But that's not all. Almost half of these vehicles were stolen in a matter of seconds, meaning the victims had little to no information to give to the police about the perpetrators on how it happened. This gang was not only well organized, but also conducted their operations with utmost stealth, leaving behind no traces of their presence. The thieves had a methodical approach. They would gain access to a car, skillfully deactivate any anti-theft mechanisms, calmly start the engine, and drive away. It appeared as though someone was simply driving their own vehicle out of a parking lot, except this time, the car rightfully belonged to someone else. The police attempted to identify a consistent pattern in these car thefts, but were unsuccessful in doing so. The gang operated by stealing cars from various locations throughout New York, making it challenging to predict their next move. Frustration grew within the police force when they noticed that the stolen car's spare parts were not appearing as anticipated. Typically, when a car is stolen, its components are dismantled, and some parts are often sold on the black market. In this manner, car thieves managed to sell stolen cars without arousing suspicion. However, this car theft operation stood out from the norm, because none of the stolen vehicles' components appeared on the streets or in spare parts stores throughout the country. This led to authorities to suspect that the stolen luxury cars were being smuggled out of the country. They dispatched a team to investigate Brooklyn ports, as it was the most likely place for exporting a large number of vehicles. However, the team came back without any evidence of suspicious activity related to car theft at the port. This left them wondering, did the cars simply vanish into thin air? Despite having limited information about the culprits, the police were certain of one thing: the heist was orchestrated by a skilled professional, likely someone with strong ties to the world of organized crime. Min Jianyang is a Chinese army intelligence officer who became America's greatest car thief. In the late 1980s, Min Jianyang was discharged from the army and moved to Shanghai. Upon relocating to Shanghai, the former Chinese military intelligence officer noticed a vacuum that needed to be filled. During that period, there was a strong desire for luxury vehicles among the affluent population in Shanghai. However, many of them were unable to purchase these cars as they were not readily available for sale. Recognizing this as a promising opportunity, Min Jianyang decided to leverage his prior experience in investigating Asian smugglers to explore a new business venture. He reached out to one of the leaders of the local gang in Shanghai and presented a business proposition. Min Jianyang explained to the gang leader that he had previously worked as a Chinese intelligence officer, investigating Asian smuggling networks. Consequently, he possessed knowledge of smuggling routes and could facilitate the smooth transition of cars into Shanghai. The gang leader, on the other hand, would use his influence and sell the cars to his network. He welcomed the idea since he knew how lucrative the business was. He could easily get a car for $100,000 and sell it for $200,000 in China, thanks to the considerable demand for luxury cars in the country. The two agreed to a 60-40 split deal. Jianyang would take 60% of the profit, while the gang leader would take 40%. The Shanghai gang boss gave Jianyang $500,000 on the spot to set up his team and begin operations. Yang chose to operate in the city of New York because he knew the city had a lot of rich people and would get all kinds of luxury cars. He entered the country using a fake ID, maintained a low profile, and secured a warehouse where they could keep the cars before transporting them to China. He ensured that the warehouse had no police station nearby and was located in a tranquil area with few people and low police presence. Jianyang handpicked each member of his team and made sure they were all Chinese because those were the only people he could trust. Once the team was set up, they disguised the warehouse as a food storage warehouse. They filled the building with several boxes, which gave outsiders the impression that the warehouse belonged to a food company. To further sell their cover, the team bought food and stored them in a refrigerator. However, even with these measures put in place, Jianyang didn't want to leave any stone unturned. He bought the warehouse under an anonymous company and separated himself from the company so that nothing would connect him with the warehouse if the authorities were to discover that it was a front. Following this, Yang recruited Dean at an auction. Dean, an expert in stealing salvaged vehicles, was tasked with stealing the cars. Yang was not a thief, and at the same time, he wanted to keep his hands clean. Dean brought in Mario Lopez, a seasoned car thief with even more expertise than himself, to join the operation. Lopez's role involved approaching the selected car, skillfully circumventing all security measures such as motion sensors, steering wheel lock, GPS systems, and recessed door locks in preparation for theft. Yang proceeded to enlist a team of thieves tasked with driving the targeted cars out of garages, parking lots, or malls, and relocating them to a discreet location. At times, they would strategically position these stolen cars in plain view, particularly in areas where numerous luxury vehicles were parked with relatively few witnesses around. These cars might remain in parking lots for up to 2 days before Dean would take charge of moving them to a food warehouse. Yang designed the operation in this manner to ensure that only his most trusted associates were aware of his involvement. After the stolen cars reached the warehouse, it was the responsibility of the Chinese team to arrange for their transportation into China. However, Yang aimed to ensure that the buyers in Shanghai perceived these cars as new and without prior owners. To achieve this, the Chinese team conducted thorough inspections of the cars, carried out any necessary repairs, and meticulously packaged them to present an appearance of brand new vehicles. Subsequently, the stolen luxury cars were loaded into containers with falsified manifests, where the container's contents were inaccurately declared as food. Yang was well aware that the police's initial search for stolen cars would likely focus on the New York port. To divert attention, he opted to ship the stolen vehicles to New Jersey, a neighboring state of New York. The containers were then loaded onto a train headed for California, a location on the opposite side of the country. While one might assume Yang chose California to evade law enforcement, his actual reason was the ports being closer to China. In the subsequent phase, the cars, still concealed as food containers, were loaded onto a ship in California. Interestingly, this vessel wasn't bound directly for China, but the East China Sea. During the journey, the vessel met another ship, and the containers were transferred to the second ship. Unlike other ships and trains that believed they were transporting food, the owners of the second vessel were fully aware of the true contents of the container. This second vessel would then transport the cars into China. This strategy enabled Yang to smuggle thousands of stolen luxury cars into China for over 5 years without detection. While US law enforcement continued to deal with daily cases of stolen luxury vehicles, Yang and his team made millions of dollars from their thefts and remained a puzzle for the police. The team executed their operations with a high level of professionalism, making it exceedingly challenging for the police to trace their activities. Despite stealing thousands of cars, there was no concrete evidence linking the group to car thefts. However, a minor traffic incident would soon unleash a chain of events that would jeopardize their entire multi-million-dollar operation. Over time, the demand for luxury cars in China saw a significant surge, prompting Yang to elevate his operations. To meet the escalating demand, Yang concluded that the only solution was to target locations with a high concentration of luxury cars and seize multiple vehicles at once. He decided it was time to hit car dealerships. Dean took on the role of visiting these dealerships, cleverly disguising his intention by requesting test drives. During these visits, he meticulously observed the security measures and memorized the key locations. Several nights later, the team would return to these dealerships, swiftly accessing the key storage area and making off with multiple luxury cars. By the time the alarms went off, 3 minutes later, the gang of thieves had vanished into thin air. However, a fateful day arrived when one of the stolen vehicles was involved in an accident after crossing the Triborough Bridge. The police, responding to the scene, discovered that the car had been reported stolen and subsequently arrested the driver. Dean, under pressure, eventually revealed the gang's patterns to the police, including the location of the warehouse. Meanwhile, as the police surveyed the warehouse, Yang was conducting his own counter-surveillance due to the CCTV cameras he had strategically placed in the area. Realizing that he had been compromised, Yang knew he had to disappear and eliminate all evidence. He orchestrated a deceptive maneuver by bringing trucks into the warehouse and loading all the cars and equipment, fooling the police, who initially believed he was transporting food from the warehouse. When the police raided the warehouse, they found it empty. They decided to release Dean, but kept tabs on his phone calls, hoping to trace the gang and uncover where the stolen cars were being sold before making arrests. Regrettably for the gang, during one of their subsequent heists, they made a critical error. For the first time since the inception of their operation, the police found themselves a step ahead of Yang and his crew. This was because Yang's team had become complacent and less cautious. While preparing for the second wave of car thefts, they neglected many of their established security protocols, driven by the prospect of making more money. During a recent robbery, the team transported the cars directly to the warehouse immediately after stealing them, deviating from their usual practice of parking the cars in a secret location for some time before relocating them. Unfortunately, they assumed all the cars were without GPS tracking and didn't bother to verify. As soon as the cars were reported stolen, a vehicle equipped with GPS went online and alerted the police. Previously, investigators were diligently monitoring the warehouse, aiming to identify the smuggling routes before making their arrests. However, their plans were disrupted by a local police officer who, unaware of the ongoing investigation, followed the GPS signal of the stolen cars, unintentionally jeopardizing the years-long operation. When the surveillance team at the warehouse observed the approaching police officer, they guessed that Yang's team had likely spotted him as well, leading them to the conclusion that their mission had been compromised. In response, they decided to storm the building and apprehend the gang of thieves before they could escape once more. Yang faced charges in court, but they couldn't prosecute him for the actual act of stealing vehicles since he was solely the mastermind and not directly involved in the thefts. Yang pleaded guilty to enterprise corruption, and the maximum sentence he received was 10 years behind bars. Throughout his 10-year car theft operation, Yang was estimated to have amassed around $40 million, equivalent to $75 million in today's currency. Interestingly, the police were never able to recover any of the money Yang had made. Perhaps they never went missing. Nonetheless, Jin Yang would undoubtedly be remembered as one of America's most notorious car thieves.